صباح الخير. Good morning. رح أحكي بالإنجليزي بس في ترجمة. I'll speak in English. And those of you who need simultaneous translation, there are headsets on the tables. So my name is Nadim Houiri. I'm the Executive Director of the Arab Reform Initiative. And really, it is my pleasure to welcome you today on behalf of our partners, the Robert Bosch Stiftung, and the Arab Reform Initiative. I want to say alhamdulillah as-salami to all of you who traveled, some of you from very difficult places, some of you have had some visa issues, but we're very happy to see you. And if people have joined us online, thank you for joining us as well. Let me just start. This is our second annual conference on conflict, climate change, and the environment. And in a way, things on the environment are always urgent, and yet it feels probably even more urgent this year. But why this conference? And I think that this conference very much fits in the spirit of what we try to do at the Arab Reform Initiative and what we've been able to do with the support of Robert Bosch in this space, which is really one trying to promote a local homegrown research on issues that matter to this region. And a few years ago, we started our environmental politics program with this urgent sense that maybe we're talking too much about the environment too technically in this region, when it's really ultimately about governance, about politics, about justice. I hope we're going to talk a lot about justice in the next 2 days at a time when it's really such an important theme. And to do that, we maybe need to break the silos a bit. So it's not just about the environmentalists speaking to each other. It's not about just the humanitarians speaking to each other. It's not just about the good governance people speaking to each other. It's not just about the people focusing on energy speaking to each other. And so how do we break these silos? How do we generate knowledge that also responds to the needs of our local communities, but that also take into account the very challenging context? So the first is really about generating this local agenda, generating this homegrown research, and creating spaces, platforms for the many local researchers who, frankly, against all odds, local researchers, local journalists, local lawyers, who against all odds are continuing to try to push this. The second is creating communities of practice. Everyone keeps talking about the Arab region. This is one of I find some of the hardest regions in the world to actually travel across. And every time we organize an event, it's always the same dilemma. You know, where can the Libyans go? Who will accept the Palestinians? What about the Yemenis? What about the Iraqis? What about the Lebanese? You know, and the list goes on and on and on. And we need to create these communities of practice geographically, but as I mentioned as well, specialty between different types of expertise. And that raises challenges because when we start talking about different expertise and breaking the silos, what language do we speak? And I don't speak about language in the sense of English or Arabic, but the lingo, the discourse. And I hope these conferences will help us in a way discover each other's languages, discover each other's constraints, and how we can better speak to each other. And finally, how can we create spaces that we think creatively about advocacy? Advocacy for more environmental justice at a time when are incredibly important. So I here want to just really thank the team that worked on this conference, both from EPP and from Robert Bosch, that really has put together a very interesting agenda. And I'll just briefly talk about some of the 5 key elements that we hope to touch upon. First, I think when we think about the environment and conflict in this region, the extractive industries are never far, right? They are the ones that bring attention sometimes to this region. They are the ones that end up fueling conflicts often, and they are yet sometimes presented as part of the solution for financing reconstruction. So how do we think about these extractive industries? How do we approach them? How do we try to move away from it, and how do we limit their impact? But frankly, how do we even understand it? Second, and a very important topic, and I think being in Amman it's very important to talk about this issue. It's the link between displacement and how we think about climate change. For too long, we've thought about displacement in this region as something, it happens, then people go to the status quo ante and life goes on. But I feel we've been talking about this for 3-4 decades and people are still displaced. It was the Palestinians for decades. And then it was the Syrians, the Lebanese, the Sudanese, the Yemenis, and this displacement is going on longer and longer. So how do we even think about climate change, adaptation, mitigation, when people are displaced? And how do we, again, break the silos between humanitarians who are thinking immediate relief and the need to plan medium and long-term with these communities? Finally, and perhaps more urgently, how do we think about environmental damage during conflicts, and obviously in this case with what's happening in Gaza? How do we document it? How do we qualify it? How do we talk about it? Do we even have the words? Do we need to create new concepts? Why are these words often coming to us from elsewhere? How do we want to talk about it? How do Palestinians want to talk about it, describe it? What does it mean? And frankly, how do we make sure that the push for things like accountability and assessing environmental damage that we're seeing in places like Ukraine and elsewhere, that we can implement them in our own region, starting with Gaza? And finally, actually, before last point, when we talk about how do we put these issues on the agenda, it's the role of activists, journalists, and lawyers, people like you, of how do we put it on the, how do we put these issues? How do we mobilize? How do you put environmental issues on the agenda when there seems to be a list of urgent matters to take care of, when we're dealing with famine, hunger, death? And sometimes, I heard people say, can we really push the agenda right now? Will it come across as tone deaf? And on the one hand, I think we all know that, yes, there might be things that need to immediate response, but we also know that we can, the environment is also urgent. So how do we reconcile this and find a way to push for environmental activism in the middle of constant catastrophes and emergencies? And finally, and I hear it's a theme that is very personally very dear to my heart, and I know is at the heart of a lot of the work we try to do at the Arab Reform Initiative, is accountability. How can we hold perpetrators of environmental harm and damage accountable? So as we open these 2 days plus one for those of you who are participating in the workshop, I just want to leave you with a couple of quick thoughts that the team and I were discussing as we were planning. One, this notion of justice. Can we keep the notion of justice, environmental justice, how we understand it, how we can strive for it, at the center of all our discussions in the next 2 days? Two, how do we think about governance when we talk about this link between conflict, climate change, and the environment, particularly in the context of broken governance? We all know about the broken governance in our conflict countries, right? But what we're finding out as well, there's broken governance at the regional level, but there's also broken governance at the international level. So how can we push forward an agenda when at all levels of policymaking, something is broken? And I think this puts the onus on us to try to reimagine, rethink governance structures that work for us. And we often say, okay, then we have to go very local. And definitely that will be part of the answer. But then how do you scale up? How do you scale up local governance and how do you move it up? So that's another theme, questions that I hope we can discuss across these 5 themes we will be talking about. And finally, the issue of timing. And I talked about it briefly. We live in a region where everything seems to be urgent all the time. I'm sure all of you, and I really thank you for coming, because I know all of you have to-do lists that are just keep increasing, that are urgent, and they often seem to be life and death matters, particularly those of you working on humanitarian issues. And yet the environment requires us sometimes to think long-term, medium-term, to think about future generations. So how do we reconcile these different urgencies around timelines? And how do we reconcile them between acting now in the immediate while also thinking about the day after? So with this, thank you very much. Thank you again to our partners at the Bosch Foundation. And a big thank you to the team that really organized it. I think you all know most of them. Maybe Savine, you can maybe just stand up if people don't know you. Savine heads our environmental politics program. Camille, Diana, Serene, just a huge thank you for bringing us all here. And now I'm going to ask Tobias to please chair the first panel, which will be a hybrid panel with some speakers in the room and some online. Shukran.
I guess I make the introduction here, or shall I speak up? Okay, now I will stand here for a second and then join the panel here. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Nadim. Thank you, for being here. And it's my great pleasure. Wait a second. To be here, I'm totally thankful for the Robert Bosch Foundation and the Arab Reform Initiative to welcome you all to this enlightening panel where we are discussing the dynamics of extractivism industries in the MENA region. We will particularly focus on oil and gas industries here as the role model of this kind of extractivism, but we will also kind of shifting our discussions a little bit further because you have also mentioned it, that they are presented as kind of a solution for a future clean energy transition. We are talking about new technologies that have been presented as a technological fix to really save humanity and solve the climate crisis, like carbon capture and storage. But they come also with polluting problems. So maybe we can also shift a little bit into those problems that we are facing not only presently, but maybe we are facing also new extractivism problems in future, also in terms of water questions, in terms of hydrogen production. So there will be a lot to talk about, and I'm really happy that I have great panelists here to talk a little bit, to present to you some case studies on Syria, on Yemen, also on Libya and Sudan. We will also talk about the fact how can we actually gather data here. We all know that data gathering, data collection, monitoring is a big issue when it comes to recognizing injustices and trying to seek for solutions. And we will also talk a little bit about outside players. What can actually the European Union do? What nations do? So I'm absolutely happy to have this distinguished panelist here. In terms of presentation and organization, each presenter will approximately have 10 minutes to share their findings and presenting a little bit their knowledge and addressing this kind of intersection about the extractivism industries, environmental conflict, but also peace building. And then maybe we can also imagine the future with regards to clean energy transition. So those will be the points. And I will also trying to share that maybe we can have some generalizations here and some lessons learned from all those different cases to really think about your topics of injustices, about accountability, about how actually can we reimagine things to make it better in future. And before we are diving into the insights, let me briefly introduce each speaker. Unfortunately, Shukri Hassan couldn't make it from Iraq, but he will not able to join us. But we are very happy that Mohammed Mashri is here for instead. And well, we will start like in the chronological order as it is outlined in the program, starting with Mawada Bahah. She's a Syrian freelance journalist and also specialized into environmental issues. She will tell us a little bit about things going on the ground in Syria. We will then have also virtually Ahmed Al-Wadai from Yemen, who couldn't make it here, unfortunately, but he will tell us a little bit about a recent study that he conducted on the extractivism industries in Hadramaut in Yemen. We will then come here to the floor to Wim Sonnenberg, who is working for the Humanitarian Disarmament Project, is a leader there, and working for the Dutch peace organization PAX. Then, as mentioned already, coming to Mohamed Masri, who works currently at the Institute of Social Science in Den Haag. He's also working especially focused on green transition. He will tell us a little bit more about the role of the European Union, the Green Deal, looking for windows of opportunities, but also maybe challenges in future, and tackling a little bit this question about how we can imagine the future and what other obstacles and barriers we will witness. Last but not least, we will have Yunus Abayoub, she's working as a senior unit official for the United Nations, has extensive experience in conflict resolution, peace building, governance, and sustainable development. So making a little bit the bridge to the kind of topics, but also then seeking a little bit for solutions. And with no further ado, I hope that the presentation and Zoom will work, and then I would shift to Mawada as our first speaker. Thank you very much.
صباح الخير. صباح الخير. صباح الخير لكل الموجودين. كنت حابة أكون موجودة معكم، بس للأسف ما قدرت أكون موجودة بسبب موضوع التأشيرة. صوتي واضح؟ في مشكلة بالصوت شيء؟
صوت واضح مودة، تفضلي.
تمام، أوكي. بدي أحكي مداخلتي عن موضوع استخراج النفط بسوريا، بس هيكون تركيز على موضوع الاستخراج البدائي. يعني بصراحة الطرق البدائية صارت ظهرت بعد الحرب عندنا بسوريا. تمام. هلا أكيد كانت نعرف إنه ما في خلاف إنه موضوع استخراج النفط بيترافق عادة بأضرار بيئية كبيرة، وبصير الوضع أكثر سوءا وقت تكون الدول فيها حروب واضطرابات أمنية مثل الوضع بسوريا يعني حاليا. قبل بس ما أحكي عن موضوع الاستخراج البدائي، حابة بس نوه شوي لموضوع المناطق اللي كنا نستخرج فيها النفط بسوريا. بسوريا كان في عندنا منطقتين رئيسيتين لاستخراج النفط. أول واحدة بمنطقة اسمها السويدية بمحافظة الحسكة شمال شرق سوريا. هي المنطقة تم اكتشاف النفط فيها وبلشوا الاستخراج بخمسينيات وستينات القرن الماضي، والاستخراج طبعا كان تابع لشركة للدولة. بثمانينات القرن الماضي تم استخراج النفط من منطقة اسمها وادي الفرات. هي المنطقة بتمتد من دير الزور حتى الحدود العراقية. وهذا الشيء كان يتم استخراجه بواسطة شركة تابعة لشركة شيل الأمريكية. بمنطقة وادي الفرات كان الإنتاج يوصل من 400 ألف برميل يوميا بنصف التسعينيات، بس انخفض الرقم بعدين ل 100 ألف تقريبا، وبقي في شيء في شيء ملاحظة؟ تابع يعني؟
كفي مودة.
مستمر. اوكي مستمر انتاج النفط بالمنطقه الموجوده بالحسكه كان بحدود تقريبا 200 الف برميل يوميا. وبشكل عام بالمجمل كان انتاج سوريا قبل الحرب باذار 2011 كان 385 الف برميل يوميا من النفط. 55% منها من الحقول التابعه للدوله اللي بتستثمرها الدوله يعني، والباقي من الحقول بتستثمرها شركات اجنبيه. وكمان كان بيتم تكرير 230 ألف برميل يوميا بمصفاتي حمص وبانياس. بيتم تصدير 150 ألف برميل لخارج سوريا، وغالبية التصدير كان بيروح للدول الأوروبية. لكن كل هذا الوضع تغير بعد الحرب. بعد 2011 تغير هذا الوضع بشكل كامل. بداية كان في عقوبات على سوريا، فال 150 اللي كانت تصدرها ما عاد فيها تصدرها صارت بهالحالة. ثاني شيء تم ضرب كثير من الآبار والأماكن النفطية بسوريا، وكثير من الشركات تم ضربها بالمناطق اللي خرجت عن سيطرة الدولة. وهذا الشيء خلى إنتاج النفط ينخفض. حاليا صار هو بحدود ال 14 ألف برميل يوميا. عم نحكي نحن عن الإنتاج الحكومي، بس في عنا آلاف البراميل اليومية يتم إنتاجها من خلال محارق بدائية. هي بسموها حراقات عنا باللغة المحلية يعني. هي الحراقات عم بتكون هي عبارة عن مستودع كبير بيتم وضع النفط الخام بداخله، وهذا المستودع مرتبط بأنابيب. النفط الخام بيتم رفع حرارته لدرجة الغليان، فبصير بعدين بيتبخر ويمرق بالأنابيب ويتحول لاحقا لسائل، هو إما بيكون مازوت أو بيكون بنزين. تمام. وطبعا نحن عم نحكي عن عملية بدائية بالتكرير بهالحالة، فأكيد هي مترافقة بانبعاثات غازية وكثير أضرار على الصحة وعلى البيئة. ممكن أحكي بداية على أبرز الغازات اللي عم تطلع، اللي هي بتكون غاز أول أكسيد الكربون، وهو غاز سام بيأثر على الدم وعلى الخضاب، بسبب تسمم. واستمرار التعرض لهذا الغاز ممكن يسبب وفاة أو غيبوبة طويلة. وقت عم يتم غلي النفط الخام عم بيطلع غاز اسمه غاز كبريت الهيدروجين. كمان هذا الغاز له تأثير سيء جدا على صحة الإنسان، على النواقل العصبية، وبيؤدي أحيانا للوفاة. هلا بالإضافة للغازات اللي عم تصدر، عم بيكون في عنا فضلات وبقايا من عملية التكرير. هي بتكون أشبه بالفحم هي عادة. حتى هي العملية بتم يعني ما بكون احنا خلصنا هون، عندنا عندنا أطفال وفي عنا نساء بتم بيقوموا بجمع هي الفحم، وهذا الشيء كمان بسبب أضرار على صحتهم. أو غالبية الأضرار عم بتكون هي عبارة عن أضرار بتصيب العين، ممكن تسبب العمى أحيانا للأشخاص اللي بيشتغلوا بهي المهنة. طبعا نحن عم نحكي هون مو بس أضرار على الأشخاص العاملين، حتى على المنطقة المحيطة بهي الحراقات يعني. حتى المواد اللي بتخرج من الحراقات هي عم بتكون هي نوعا ما كثير مواد انه معالجه بشكل دقيق، فبالتالي ممكن تسبب حرائق او مشاكل بالنسبه للاشخاص اللي عم يستعملوها. كمان بيطلع منها غازات خلال الاستعمال. عم نحكي عن استعمال التدفئه او استعمال المحركات. أم، وخلال المعالجه بيتم اساله كميات كبيره من النفط الخام على التربه، وهذا ايضا كمان بسبب اضرار كبيره على التربه. وبيصدر منها غازات الغاز الميثان والايثان والبروبان والبيوتان، وهي اصلا غازات سامه. فضلا عن البيئة، عن التربة، في عنا أضرار بتصيب المياه، وعم بيتم تسريب النفط على المياه. ونحن كثير شفنا حالات بنهر الفرات والخابور، كيف تم قتل الحياة المائية بهي الأنهار بسبب التسربات النفطية اللي عم نحكي عليها. آه، بشهر تموز الفائت منظمة السلام الهولندية اسمها باكس وضعت تقرير حذرت فيها من التأثير التراكمي لتلوث النفط في الشمال الشرقي لسوريا. بحسب هذا التقرير، كان تم رصد كثير من الحوادث التسرب الجماعي والفيضانات النفطية خلال الأعوام المنصرمة، وبسبب سوء صيانة الأنابيب النفطية. تمام. وكان ذروة الاستثمار الصناعي السيء بهذا النمط من الاستثمار كان ب 2013، وبين 2013 و 2017 كان في عندنا 30 ألف محرقة بهذيك المناطق. بس هلا تقريبا تقلص العدد، صار 300 فقط. مشكلة سوء الوضع الأمني والاضطرابات الموجودة بسوريا بيخلي الشركات الدولية والعالمية ما كثير تتحمس إنه هي تفوت تعمل مشاريع طويلة المدى، إنه تعمل صيانة لهالمحطات يعني، أو تستثمر بشكل دقيق يعني. لأنه أي مشروع ممكن بالآخير ما يتم استثماره بشكل دقيق يعني، وممكن تندلع حرب ويخسروا كل شيء يشتغلوا يعني. تمام. كمان في تقرير لمركز الفرات للدراسات الاستراتيجية ب 2022 ذكر إنه كمية الانبعاثات السامة في الجو ارتفعت بالهواء. وكانت كمية الرصاص بلغت 190 طن بمنطقة الحسكة والقامشلي. وكل هاي المواد السامة كانت عم تسبب أمراض جلدية وأمراض سرطانية وجلطات دماغية كمان بنفس الوقت. هاي تقريبا كل شيء عندي.
Great, thank you so much. Mawadi, I think you very quite vividly explained to us the issues and of the extractivism oil industries in Syria, and also this kind of dilemma that we are facing. It plays an important role for the economy. It does create a lot of revenues, but then again, you also outlined very clear the problems that come along with them, like social problems, health issues, also ecological consequences. We are talking also about materiality, about a poor infrastructure here that leads to leakages. So it's actually something that oscillates to a lot of different issues here: the environment, the ecosystems, the social systems, state-society relations, power hierarchies, and also injustices, because not everyone is benefiting from this kind of industries. And so therefore, it's a very interesting case. I would hand over now to Ahmed, my dear colleague Ahmed, and I'm very sorry because I think I have forgotten to introduce you properly, but I will do this. So you're an associate professor at the University of Sana'a, and you have quite deep experience also in water issues, soil pollution, and you have made this in the framework of this climate change and conflict project. You have investigated the impact now of the oil extraction industries on local communities in Hadramaut, and we are very excited to have you at least virtually here with us, and we are looking forward to your findings in presenting to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tobias. Thank you, Nadim, and the ARI team, and the Robert Bosch Foundation for organizing this conference. I don't know if you hear me very well and you see my slides. Please confirm that.
All works good. Yeah.
Good. So the presentation briefly will be talk about the impact of oil extraction industries on local communities and environment in Hadramaut Governorates in Yemen. This project was funded by Robert Bosch Foundation in the last 2 years. And we were 3 partners actually implemented this project. Mainly the project goal was to explore the fundamental impact of oil extraction on livelihood, on the health and on the community, the targeted communities that we selected in Hadramaut. Also to link the conflict and the climate change impact on environment. And we were interested to see the result of this project, how we can develop activities and restore peace over the natural resources in the targeted areas which negatively harmed by some oil companies in the area. So also we were planning to raise the awareness of the sensitivity of the environmental stress in the area. Actually, this work was continuous of some efforts in the past to assess the impact of those oil companies on Hadramaut environment, but we tried a different approach maybe to see how we can go deep in this situation based on the resources that we have. So this project partners was the Medical Mercy Foundation, the CARBO, the Center of Applied Research in partnership with the Orient, and the Ittifaq Center for Environmental and Agricultural Consultancies as feed implementing project activities on the ground. So our approach for this project was the first to organize inception workshop where we invite governmental staff, oil companies representatives, and the communities, some of the community representatives, to collect them together and to discuss with them the project goal, the project approach, the activities, and see the response, and if maybe we can change the activity or change the approach or do the reprogramming of the activities. And then we would like to hear in this inception report, what is the targeted areas? What is the governmental officials and the stakeholders, where can select, where is the area that is most affected by this oil contamination? Then our approach was to take soil and water samples from different areas and to analyze them in the laboratory to see the level of this contamination. The fourth approach is to conduct a field study by a household survey for 100 families and 6 focus group discussions, and also conduct a 30 key informant interviews for the key persons in the communities governmental officials, activists, NGO directors, etc., to see what is the information and background about the oil contamination or the level of contamination in the area. Then the fifth approach is to nominate quality staff from governmental staff, from Office of Agriculture, Water Resources Authority, Oil Office, and Health Office. So we are planning to train all these people about the environmental issues. And of course, the person who trained them must be a high qualified person, because those people, they have some knowledge about environmental contamination, about health issues, but we need someone high advanced to train them and build their capacity so that they can transfer their knowledge to the sub-staff working in those government offices. The sixth approach is to conduct a raising awareness campaign in the community by our technical team, through posters, brochures, meeting to the people after Jum'ah, Friday prayer, for example, in the school, in the souk or markets, to raise the awareness about the environmental issues. And then the seventh approach is to conduct a mediation workshop where oil company representative and governmental staff and also the project team and the community come together on one table and discuss how they can mitigate or reduce the impact of this, how they can collaborate with each other to solve this issue instead of hiding and instead of each one working separately. Then we drafted a policy brief out of all these findings and results. So the target group, as I mentioned, is to community nearby oil polluted areas, governmental staff, representative of oil industry, civil society, and also some people who are interested or researcher or scientists. So this is the inception workshop where the opened officially by the director of the districts where we conducted this project, and the deputy of Hadramaut Governorates, also he joined the inception workshop. We have a good discussion about the level of contamination, the targeted areas. Actually, we have to introduce the project to them to convince them that we are going to do this to avoid any complication in the future. Then our technical team also, we hired a high qualified staff to collect the soil samples and water samples from those areas to analyze them in the lab. And this also the soil, it was clearly there's some salt and some contamination in the soil, but unfortunately we don't have a high laboratory lab to analyze hydrocarbonic elements to approve the level of this contamination. So we just did the pH, EC and TDS and calcium carbonate, some basic analysis based on the availability of that in Yemen. But it was clearly from the water samples that it's highly contaminated by these oil companies and by some salt in the water, in the groundwater. But as I mentioned, we have to approve that scientifically by the analyzing this, which need to be transferred or sent outside of Yemen in high laboratory with high technology analysis. So we did also the household survey, focus group discussion, PII interview in this community, and we gathered the very good information that about the significance of impact. So some results shows that there are many cancer cases, there's many allergy and some health diseases. There's some low crop productivity. Farmers are complaining their lands and soil has low productivity in the last 5 years. The awareness program are lacking in that area. The people are understanding the problem, but they need some steps forward to solve this issue. I don't think I will have time to discuss all these results, but the number of complaints to the court, people have complained to the court, but nobody responded very well to their complaint about their animals, camels, their sheep grazing in that area, about their farm effect, about their losing their job, losing their livelihood. Then we conducted on-job training for those governmental staff. On-job training, we gathered them in one room. Then we visited all these governmental offices to deliver the high training issues about the environmental for the health office and agriculture office, social affairs office, oil industry. And I think it was a very good training for those staff. Then we conducted awareness campaign through posters, brochures in the community. And after the awareness raising campaign, we noticed that the media started visiting that area and people start protesting and complaining to get any support from the governmental offices, from the oil companies to solve the issues. So the awareness campaign was very positive impact on the community. Also, we did using GIS remote sensing maps for environmental characteristics. We identify some monitoring wells, some environmental disasters like locusts or insects that attack farming areas in Yemen and in Hadramaut in specific. We compare Yemen land use in 2002 and 1993, for example. Some oil spot or the block of the oil companies where it's contaminated in that desert area. And also we gathered a bunch of meteorological data, and the reason was to have rainfall data, soil radiation, wind speed, wind direction, the cyclone. So all this data will be benefit for future scientific research. If anyone would like to get help, he doesn't or she doesn't need to search for all the meteorological data. It's available there in one package, so anyone can use it efficiently and to support the research in the future in the area. There were some challenges in this project. Some governmental offices were not willing to support. The topic is sensitive, and some people they don't want to deliver more information about that. A lack of scientific laboratory to analyze heavy metals and hydrocarbonic elements. There was some limitation of access in the area, and also some risk to fieldwork documentation using camera or video or something like that. So this is the project. I would like to thank Robert Bosch Foundation for supporting this project. Our partner, Dr. Tobias, was part of the team, and also Medical Mercy Foundation. So I would like to thank all of them for the significant support to have this successful project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. I'm super grateful that you presented so much details and also so many findings, and also remained almost in the time I dedicated to this presentation. So thank you so much. I think it's especially your pictures and have showed us quite vividly again the impacts on the environment of the extractivism industries, but also then again how this translates into, well, more grievances, into differences and inequalities between different social actors. And I think that this case study from Yemen makes it quite clear. What I also liked, I mean, and I had some insights into this project, as you mentioned, but I like that you were also combining here different elements, that we are not only doing research, but also thinking about further implementing those results. So how can we actually train people? How can we actually raise awareness about those facts? How can we actually collect different groups of people? And you have also mentioned that here we do face some problems because not everyone is willing to be part of this kind of implementation process, because there are some different interests and a lot of people want to remain the status quo. So there needs also much more pressure. Another point is that this project has actually also combined different methods here. You have collected data samples from soil and water, so using a little bit more natural science methods here, but then also using social science methods in having interviews here and really seeing what people are thinking about the injustices that are happening here. And I think it's a perfect bridge to bring the panel now back to the floor here, and then starting again with Wim, who will also tell us a little bit more about, as I think, about data collection, monitoring, and how we can actually then expose these kinds of inequalities.
Yeah, good morning, and thanks everyone. I'm going to present some slides, so it's easier to see what I'm showing. I'm just looking for the clicker for the presentation. Thank you. Again, good morning. My name is Zumbraegel. I work for PAX. It's a Dutch peace organization, and we work in various conflict-affected areas on both peace building, and I'm part of the humanitarian disarmament team, and we're leading a project on the environmental dimensions of armed conflict. And today I want to talk a bit about our experiences over the role of conflicts on the extractive industries. And I'll take some case studies over the last couple of years in countries that we worked on, and also trying to demonstrate how we use data collection and monitoring to inform decision-making and political discussions on addressing the protecting the environment in armed conflict. So as we heard from the previous speakers on Syria about the makeshift refineries, this is one example from that in northeast Syria. This one's actually taken in Deir ez-Zor, where you see like the white landscape being affected by thousands and thousands of makeshift refineries. But I'll take from the case study would be Libya, and then talk a bit about Syria and about Iraq, and each has their own different dimensions which are helpful to address. And the reason in particular in this kind of research we're looking at is we have to look at the extractive industries through the life cycle of conflict. So basically, what are the role of extractive industries before conflict, and how they impact environmental, what are the environmental consequences, how are they being targeted during conflicts, and what are the pollution dimensions of that. But also after conflicts, as we take the case study from Iraq, there are still ongoing issues, and also Syria, around oil pollution. So in this case, we are looking at starting off with Libya, which is an interesting case because it brings together also different actors in the conflict, which has a relationship with environmental consequences. So, as you know, Libya still has one of the largest crude oil reserves in the world. There's like 40 billion barrels of oil still in the soil. So you can understand the conflict itself. It's about getting access to oil fields and gas fields as well, controlling them for energy production and exports. So there's a large amount of money involved, and which also brings in different actors. For example, in Libya, we also see the involvement of private military companies like the Wagner company from Russia, which is involved trying to control access to natural resources. During the conflict itself, we've seen there have been several attacks on pipelines and oil fields in a way of controlling them, but also of denying access to oil production by groups targeting these facilities, including pipelines, tanker storages. So that results in localized pollution from the soil, but also massive burning of oil as well, which increases air pollution. And on the left, we see on the right, sorry, the control at the moment by different groups, when you also see like the oil fields. So you can see how important oil fields are for warring parties to have control over. We also know, in particular with oil and extractive industries, you need a lot of environmental regulation. And often in armed conflicts, and even after armed conflicts, environmental regulation is weak, it's not being enforced, it doesn't have a priority, which is worsening environmental conditions, risk of oil spills, and further environmental deterioration. In the case of Libya, most of them are far away in the desert, but still each desert also has unique ecosystems. So, and also it's important when it comes to environmental and health regulations for workers in the oil industry, which can still be exposed to a range of pollutants. What's helpful also in terms of understanding the scale of the oil pollution is like we use a lot of remote sensing. In this case, this is a research project done by the University of Colorado, which has a really helpful tool using to detect flaring from oil industry, oil and gas industry. So you can pick this up from space. You can locate where most of the locations are. In this case, you can clearly see all the lightning dots are flaring sites or other industrial activities that creates a heat signature, but you can pick them up. And in this case, you can also quickly look at the flaring numbers. And in this case, in Libya, you see the flaring went down during the heat of the conflict, but now it's with the relatively stable area, you see the flaring going up again also leading to much more air pollution from the industry itself. This is one example where remote sensing can be helpful to understand like the scale of the extractive industries pollution and the environmental consequences of that. In the meantime, we also see there are ongoing attacks, so armed groups or people or criminal gangs trying to make use of the oil pipelines, which are are spread out to the desert, and not everywhere it can be easily controlled. So people trying to tap into pipelines, things go wrong. So here you see an example of an oil spill happening in the desert in Libya. Or sometimes there are still ongoing attacks on these pipelines. This is one from a couple of years ago where a pipeline was bombed. There's a whole dimension, environmental dimension to the extractive industries that even in post-conflict phase has impact on the environment itself. Moving on to Syria, a little bit was already discussed by the previous speaker on oil extraction, but I will take it a bit broader. So again, if you look at the cycle of conflict, Syria still has 2.5 billion barrels of oil in the soil. Most of it is based in Hasaka and Deir ez-Zor. But also throughout the conflict, again, we see the direct impact from the conflict on the oil industry, with targeting, first of all, ISIS taking over oil fields, then being targeted by the US. Currently, there are still a fight over some of the gas fields. In North, I'll show some examples later. Turkey is still now at the moment targeting oil fields as well in Northeast Syria under control of the SDF. But in the meantime, there are all like ongoing issues that are worsening the situation, in particular in Syria, which is affected by climate change, less water, yet pollution continues. So there's more oil spills happening, getting into the water that's already affected, but with lower water levels, meaning that dilution is getting more problematic in case it happens. But also the indirect consequences of conflict are affecting the environment as well. An example from ISIS blowing up one of the gas fields in Shah near to Homs. This is an example from this year where Turkey bombed a oil facility in Hasaka, close to Meylan, which led to a massive oil spill on the local side. But still at the moment, the local authorities are working on cleaning up some of the oil that ended up in the river, flowing in the Jagdjak River on the way to the Euphrates, or the Khabur, sorry. So that's still an ongoing issue where the conflict itself has an impact on the environment. But as a secondary conflict, we looked at deforestation in Syria, which could be linked to some extent with increase of fuel prices. So here, this is in the northwest of Syria, where increase of deforestation was happening because people don't have access anymore to gas and fuel for cooking. We looked at remote sensing to look at this case is the regime-controlled area was a massive increase of forest loss over the last 12 years. Which has been driven by fuel needs and the lack of access to fuel being able to be affordable for people. And it's even worse in other parts of the northwest Syria, in particular in Aleppo and in the Afrin area, where since 2022 or 2020, some Syrian militias who took over the area have been chopping down a lot of wood for sales as well, for in particular with the harsh winters and lack of access to fuel. So that's one of the other unintended consequences of the conflict, which has an impact on natural resource extraction. Beyond the other extractive industries, we looked at the impact of how the other like mineral extraction has links with the war. So in Syria's phosphate industry, which is based mostly in Homs, it still has large amounts of phosphate in the soil. We see Iran-backed militias or Iran itself. We see Russian private military companies being involved in the extractive industries trade. Again, limited oversight. Money is being used in the sales and export of that. And because of the difficulty of access, we don't know so much about the local environmental conditions, but in particular in these areas are fairly remote, but it still makes an interesting case to look at how extractive industries can be a tool for money for this kind of groups. Another unintended consequence Syria witnessed, and also the same for Iraq, by the way, massive urban destruction, which also in that sense needs reconstruction materials. So we see in Idlib and other areas as well, there is an increase of quarries that are used for construction materials. Again, with limited oversight, local communities have been complaining about how these quarries, stone quarries used for cement production and stones for reconstruction materials have an impact on the local environment. It requires a lot of water in the process. It has affected the local conditions for the geological conditions. And as well, there people complained about environmental health risk from air pollution from these facilities. Again, with limited oversight, but it's another sort of unintended consequence of environmental destruction linked with the war. There's really good research done by journalists from the Ana Baladi Syrian group of media, which have been really documented this in great extent. Here's an example of 2014, where just to show you this one of these quarries, and this is 2022, so it's rapidly expanding also affecting agricultural areas, but it's just a way of using satellite imagery to monitor these sites if these kind of incidents come up. Lastly, looking at Iraq. Iraq is an interesting case. Of course, there has been widespread attacks throughout many years in Iraq. That's an attack on their own industry that's very well documented, so I won't go into detail around that. But we do see continued attacks, particularly by ISIS, against still in some of the provinces in Kirkuk on oil facilities. Iraq is still dealing with the cleanup of the Ghiyar oil fires. A month ago, there was still a lot of oil spills in Salahadin, where ISIS, when they were treating, they blew up some of the oil wells at the Ajiu oil fields that still have not been properly fixed. So when the heavy rains were coming up, oil spills still affect agricultural areas. But what's interesting about the case about Iraq is like another dimension is looking at the flaring industry as well. Iraq also exports a lot of gas to Iran because the sanctions, Iran is exporting gas to Iraq because there's an exemption under the current export rules for Iran to be able to export it to Iraq because Iraq's capacity for gas is still limited. So, but Iraq is still one of the largest gas flares in the world. So you would say it would be fairly easy to adjust this and capture the gas with sufficient investment and then use the gas for your own energy production. But because of, and that's like another sort of conflict dimension, Iran has large influence on the, of course, on the Iraqi politics, and because they can like a model of money by selling Iraq, the gas from Iran, they still undermining the attempts by, if there would be if it would be a substantial attempt to capture the flaring in Iraq. So that's being limited, or it's being not done at all. So Iran can still export gas to Iraq. Iraq continues the flaring, and the flaring itself still has large air pollution issue, which has been documented by ourselves, but also by many other groups as well. This is just one example from Basra, where you see a massive flaring still causing massive air pollution. Everyone from the region who've been there know how substantial the air pollution is. So that's also an indirect cause of the war between, or the sort of a quiet war between, of course, the US, Iran, its sanctions over the nuclear program, but it has environmental ramifications for people living in Iraq because it's limiting the capacity for Iraq to downscale the flaring and address the environmental and health concerns of that. So you can see like there are many different scales of how extractive industries play a role in conflict, what the environmental consequences are, what public health consequences are. So lastly, on that note, I also want to talk a little bit about like policy interventions, because like what do we think is possible? In this case, I think what's helpful, and I try to demonstrate that with this, like it's really helpful to have proper monitoring mechanism in place to understand the scale, the impact on local communities, to engage local communities in their research. It's helpful because we can use this kind of research in policy initiatives. So, for example, last week at the UN Environment Assembly, there was a resolution adopted on environmental assistance and monitoring of areas affected by armed conflict, which gives UNEP more mandate to be involved in that. But also, I think this kind of research helps to push for dedicated mechanisms to address environmental remediation, cleanup, and lastly, I think it's very important to have proper data to put this on the political agenda, because the environment is often quoted as a sort of silent and forgotten forgotten victim of armed conflict. But I think our research and the broader research can be helpful to put this back on the agenda, hold states, but also companies accountable for their practices in conflict-affected areas, and ensure proper mechanisms are set up to prevent, minimize, and address environmental pollution, and invest in remediation and reconstruction in post-conflict affected states, also with the link to the climate resilience as well, but I'll leave that for the other panel. So I'll leave it at this, and looking forward to the discussions for the rest of the week. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Wim. That was excellent. Also, in case of expanding a little bit the knowledge of cases we are seeing here, and also that you do not have to be on the ground to see what is actually happening here. So using also innovative data collection, satellite data to reflect on what is going on here. You also added the complexity, and I think that was very important by looking into what is actually also happening with the absence of fossil fuels, like deforestation in Lebanon. This was quite vivid, apparent. We have seen there are also some other incidences we can face here in the same manner in Yemen. Mineral extraction, that will be another point to maybe discuss later. And also the involvement of the international political economy. And therefore, and we are looking a little bit on our time, I'm very happy to invite Mohammed now, who will also tell us a little bit now, shifting a little bit also and making it even more complex here by looking into outside actors, the international political economy with the European Union. Thank you very much. I don't...
My book is not on database, but it's supposed to open a new dimension and also for a discussion on it. And it focused mainly on the European Green Deal, which was enacted in 2019. And the purpose of the European Green Deal was to reach climate neutrality by 2050 in the EU. But also, in order to reach climate neutrality, there's supposed to be huge investments in green technologies, in decarbonization of industry. So in order to reduce emissions, and also securing strategic access of the EU on what we call critical minerals or rare earths, which are like a kind of the EU identified them to be. I mean, there's always an updated version of it, but the latest version of it is like 27 critical minerals, things like cobalt, phosphate rock, lithium, magnesium, titanium, gallium, platinum, and others. And as the name indicates, they are rare, not actually very rare, but they require so much effort to extract and so on. So not every country is able to provide them. And currently, China is controlling 60% of the supply of these minerals, and 60% to the EU. And the second provider is Russia, at least until 2021. So the EU is trying to somehow foster technologies in that are green, and at the same time to secure access to these minerals in order to have more strategic independence and power in this sense. I mean, when we speak about decarbonization, we speak about electrification of industries using electricity from renewables, from different kind of renewables like solar energy, like wind energy, and other means. But not every industry can use electricity. So for that, we use then hydrogen, because not every industry can use this. And when we speak about hydrogen, we have different variants of hydrogen, as you all know, like green hydrogen, there is blue hydrogen, and there's gray hydrogen. Blue hydrogen comes from the carbon capture from hydrocarbons. But the most interesting of these is green hydrogen, which is being generated from water using electrolysis, mostly desalinated water. And here comes the challenge, but of course, the process itself needs also an energy. So you are going to use, again, renewable energy, so solar energy or wind. And that's why North Africa is very important in this sense. So according to the Green Deal, about 20 million tons should be produced and saved in the European Bank of Hydrogen. Half of them should come from outside Europe. The question is from where they would come, and most probably, of course, the most convenient place would be the MENA region, and especially North Africa. So there are already, for example, pipelines going from Algeria with natural gas, sending natural gas to Italy through Tunisia, to Sicily, and then to Italy. So there are talks to use this pipelines in also transferring hydrogen from Tunisia. There are talks from Tunisia, also from Algeria, but also active in this topic is Morocco. Morocco is actually proceeding even, I think, in advanced track more than Tunisia, even in this sense. There's also the talk on critical minerals that we just stated, but not lots of Arab countries are involved in this. Morocco, at least, is also active in this this topic, especially in terms of cobalt and phosphate. But I believe Tunisia could also be a potential, given that phosphate is one of the minerals there. But still, I mean, this topic of critical minerals is not still one of the important topic there, but it could be, since we said that the EU is interested in securing access to these minerals, I mean, mineral industry in Europe generally is not active because of environmental concerns, of course, use of water, and also safety and health, occupational safety and health for workers. So yeah, there are problems with the unions, there are problems with pollution and so on. So it's likely that this task would be outsourced outside Europe, and it could be then one of the things that would be an active topic in the Middle East generally. There's also a topic of the carbon barrier adjustment mechanism, CPEM, which requires that energy-intensive industries like fertilizers, for example, like aluminum, like iron and steel, that are exporting to European markets will be required to report on their carbon emissions and pay a tariff if the carbon footprint is high. And of course, this gives further incentive for Middle Eastern countries, especially, for example, Tunisia, which is actively linked to the European market, to consider decarbonization as one of the important topics in order to be able to export to the EU without having to pay the high tariffs. So also there is the concern of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Of course, this intensified European demand on renewables and maybe should accelerate the process. So all of these says that it is a very important topic for the future. But the question is whether hydrogen, okay, we when we speak about hydrogen, when we speak about renewable energy, we speak about clean energy, and we assume that this will solve everything. But unfortunately, there are some environmental aspects that are not always positive in generating this kind of energy. So there is a really interesting study that was made by Heinrich Pohl Stiftung, for example, in Tunisia, that spoke about problems of green hydrogen, environmental problems, and social problems also. For example, just to be brief, environmental problems could be desalination, the use of, okay, we say, of course, Tunisia, for example, has problems with water, as many countries in the Middle East. So, of course, not fresh water will be used, but it will be desalinated seawater. But the problem is that desalination, when it is used in a large scale, will lead to salination of the seawater, which will affect then the sea life and so on. So this is one of the problems. Also, the chemicals that could be poured in the sea because of the process. This is a second. But even more important is local communities living in Tunisia. There's an assumption that the Middle East is full of deserts. We can place renewable energy projects anywhere. It's not a problem. Deserts are unlimited and so on. But actually, many of the areas that are supposed to host these projects are actually used for communal activities like, for example, herding of cattle or sheep and so on, and or agriculture. And so the question of compensation to the local communities is raised. This is one of the things. And also whether they have a right for development of these areas, and not just having projects where multinationals come and invest in the area without involving the local communities who have developmental needs. They also need water for agriculture, for example. They also need energy, for sure. So whether they should be integrated in this, whether they should have a share in the project and in the benefits of the projects, this is one of the things that should be considered. As clear now, it's hydrogen could be again one of the things that points to extractivism, even if we speak about clean energy and renewables and so on. And the term itself, extractivism, has many connotations. You find it in literature with different interpretations, but among the different interpretations that you find, you can see some like lines there. When we speak about extractivism, something like appropriation of natural and human resources, wealth, capital accumulation, and centralization of power that might emerge from power imbalances and wealth flows within the state, regional, global, or across time. So all of these also matches the case of hydrogen. So it could be a case of extractivism. And having highlighted this, we are now in front of two pathways. We can speak about two pathways in terms of the hydrogen plan. One of them is extractivism. So we are speaking about EU trying to, for example, depend on the state and capacity building for state institutions or projects and so on. And then multinationals, European multinationals gaining from the process, maybe some local tycoons or big business or whatever. And so the elites and the state benefiting from the process. This is one pathway. And the other pathway is more participatory ways of doing this. And this could only be possible by the interest, appealing to the interests of the different stakeholders. So backward integration, forward integration for SMEs, for example, for local business, and so on, to generate jobs, security for workers, a structural adjustment, training, and like active labor and market policies for labor, local communities compensation, also involving them in the project, And this is what will raise the interest of the local communities. And then we can have then a policy coalition that would support this process and will be stable and sustainable. So there could be a contradiction of EU developmental policies for non-democratic countries in this sense. On one hand, Europe needs to secure access to hydrogen and maybe critical minerals at a future point of time. And on the other, the EU developmental policy would normally aid civil society, participatory decision-making, and so on. So yeah, there's then somehow conflicting objectives, and of course the only stable and just and sustainable way would be, of course, to appeal again to the interest of the stakeholders by different projects that appeal to them. And at the same time, okay, secure a plan. And only this can be then a more participatory way that would avoid the emergence of a more extractivist approach in the hydrogen plan. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. Well, thank you for making our lives even more complicated, because I think you have made it very clear that even if we are now heading into a post-oil period, and maybe we can at least marginalize or leave out some of the problems that comes with fossil fuel extractivism, even then, this kind of decarbonization is not the entire solution so far because of a lot of many problems. You have discussed this, the raw materials, water problems. Just to give you one number, I mean, to produce 1 kilo of green hydrogen, you need at least 9 kilo of purified water. So there is a mismatch. And even because this will, as you just told us, I mean, will be produced in arid zones using fertile land for planting a lot of new renewable energy sources, using desalination with all the brine discharge, and the chemical discharges have problems. You need also water actually to clean the solar panels. So this is another thing that adds actually to the problems. And we can already notice this in some areas in Tunisia and Morocco, where there are grievances among farmers for this kind of clean energy transition. I can also add maybe a little bit that I have looked into the hydrogen partnerships of Germany. And so far, there's not one word about those kind of injustices. So there's no word of compensation. There's the only problems, it's about economic costs and about technical barriers. So, and I think that, and you have just outlined it quite vividly, that we have two pathways. We do not have to continue what we have done over the last century, but we could make things better and easier, and but we have to address those questions of injustice and accountability. So thank you again so much. I would now come back also to join you on the floor, but then head also virtually to our last speaker now. And I hope it works again to switch back to the virtual floor, and to welcome Yunus Abayoub from the United Nations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to touch upon the issue of international and transnational legal instruments that try to look at this phenomenon and try to curb the negative impact of extractive industries in conflict-affected countries. Since the late 1990s, there has been a proliferation of transnational and international initiatives that aimed at addressing the connection between resource exploitation, violent conflict, and human rights abuse. This has become known as the problem of conflict resources. So, as an example, during the civil war that raged in Sierra Leone between 1991 and 2002, it is worth noticing that much of the fighting and related atrocities between the opposing and warring parties and rebel groups and the government forces occurred in areas where the mining activities were quite heavy, especially in the Kono district. A company called Koidu Holdings actually took control of the mining in that area, and hundreds of residents have been evicted from their homes to make way for expanding the diamond excavation in these mines. Some families were actually included in a so-called company's resettlement program, while many, I would say even majority, actually were left homeless and destitute. And even those who were rehoused soon discovered that the company's promises to provide modern housing, running water, schools, health, basically clinics, public services, were not materializing once the mine has been established. So following this issue, grievances grew and they erupted into riots that left many dead and several injured. So while the social costs of mining have been borne by local communities, the hundreds of millions of dollars that generated by the diamond trade have continued to leave that area, the Koidu town. And it's interesting to see, for instance, that when the Panama Papers investigation revealed so many hidden facts and money around the world, this company, the Koidu Holdings, was actually registered in the British Virgin Islands by Mossack Fonseca, the law firm that was at the center of the scandal of the Panama Papers. I'm just giving this example, and this is not a new or certainly not a unique story to Sierra Leone. Other countries, and we've heard a few examples of conflict-affected countries plagued by the issue of resource extraction. So the ability of transnational corporations working in extractive industry to evade responsibility for negative impacts of their activities in mostly the global south is quite established by now. Yet, it is important to give those examples to illustrate the vicious circle of violence, resource dispossession, corruption, and abuses in countries like Sierra Leone and others that find themselves trapped into this vicious circle. So it is a starting point for rethinking the relationship between legal regulation and global governance on the one side, and extractivism and conflict on the other. This is, in my opinion, the heart of the problem. So rather, as we unfortunately have heard in the media and have read, that this issue is a domestic problem. The fact that illegal resource exploitation in conflict and post-conflict societies should not be seen as a domestic problem. It is intrinsically a transnational one, which gives rise to international and transnational lawmaking that goes beyond the national systems. This widespread misconception that the civil war, for instance, in Sierra Leone or Congo and other places, is the archetype of what I would call resource-driven conflict, initiated and prolonged by the so-called greedy rebel groups exploiting rich diamond mines. The documenting of human rights abuses by media, by international NGOs during armed conflicts gave momentum, though, to the development of a regulatory framework and corporate standards, which have since they became some sort of mainstream response to the conflict minerals. It is therefore paramount importance to recognize the role of legal instruments in the distribution of natural resources in fragile conflict and post-conflict settings. There are actually several regulatory regimes, most famous of which you probably heard of them: the Kimberley Process or Certification Scheme for Diamonds, KPCS, the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, Due Diligence Guidance on Responsible Supply Chains of Minerals from Conflict-Affected and High-Risk Areas. These three are among the major ones. So these are diverse regimes that are part of what I call transnational or international legal process, in which the public and the private actors have come together to develop legal norms, principles, and practices across a variety of legal systems to ensure that international trade in certain commodities do not contribute to fueling further conflicts and more human rights violation and abuse. So while these instruments often originate in the international sphere, these are norms and discourses that have strong impact and influence on domestic and regional laws. I'll give you an example on this. For instance, the Section 1502 of the United States Dodd-Frank Act that focuses on conflict minerals originating from the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have the European Union Regulation 2017-821, which lays down the supply chain due diligence obligations for union importers of tin, tantalum, and tungsten, as well as gold originating from conflict-affected and high-risk areas. So while using the international as an analytical framework to understand this vicious circle between mineral extraction and conflict, it is important to also look at it from a critical perspective and focus on political economic assumptions that unfortunately have shaped the construction and circulation of these legal measures that aim at curbing illegal resource extraction. So what I mentioned earlier as initiatives are quite important. They have had an impact, but unfortunately, these measures have failed to challenge the structural conditions that help cause the human problem at the core of this phenomenon, which is a reproduction of corporate abuses, dispossession, and armed violence. So we should, in my opinion, look at the intersection, the relationship between law, resource distribution, and political economic dynamics. The dominant legal discourse and practices on what we call conflict minerals frame bad governance, corruption, violence, that look at all these issues as simply local dysfunctions in these conflict-affected countries. The problem with this approach is that it's not only distract us from the global market processes, the political economy at the global level of production, consumption, but it recreates an artificial distinction between the role of the public sector and that of the private, which further contributes to shielding and protecting corporate actors from scrutiny and perpetuates impunity. What I called earlier, where I gave an example, the most well-known legal instrument is the Kimberley process for diamonds. So in response to the civil society campaigns in the 90s and 2000 against the so-called blood diamonds and the United Nations General Assembly recommendation, the Kimberley process was established in 2003 to regulate legitimate trade in diamond and exclude illegitimate one, which is called conflict diamonds. So this Kimberley process is an international certification scheme involving a system of import-export permits for rough diamonds. It is based on voluntary commitments undertaken by states, including the adoption of appropriate national legislation, in addition to the establishment of system of international control which are designed to eliminate conflict diamonds from the shipments around the globe. So while the Kimberley process is concerned with trade in conflict diamonds, you have other initiatives like the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which go beyond the scope of the Kimberley process, and they build on similar initiatives supported either by the World Bank, industry, civil society, the UN. For instance, you have the Publish What You Pay campaign. This EITI was launched in 2002 at the World Summit on Sustainable Development, and it requires from host states and companies operating in these conflict-affected areas to disclose information on the governance of oil, gas, mining sectors, including the allocation of contracts, licenses, excavation, exploration, production, revenue collection, payment, and the spending, basically trying to establish some sort of good governance scheme and framework for the extractive industries in these areas. So to sum up, the impact of extractive activities in conflict and fragile countries has become increasingly submitted under the radar and resulted this in the development of public and semi-private legal arrangements like the ones I just mentioned. Yet, we need to look closely at how international, transnational regulatory initiatives, such as the ones I mentioned, AITI, Kimberley Process, the OECD due diligence guidance, have sought to securitize and transform mineral governments in countries experienced or emerging from violent conflict. My contention that I would like to leave you with here is that these existing legal norms that try to make these companies accountable, and I refer to some of them, rest on this on a number of assumptions, unfortunately, that limits their capacity to challenge the structural political economic conditions that actually are at the root of the problems they are meant to address and to respond to the concerns of affected communities. So I'll leave you with 3 key points here to take away. These regulatory regimes, while they have had, I would say, a relative impact, unfortunately still promote a view of the extractive industry as a partner for peace, in line with this liberal peace agenda of overlooking its role at the core in generating grievances integral to the causation of conflicts and legitimizing this continued operation. Second, these instruments support, I would say, a narrow understanding, a depoliticized understanding of human rights at the expense of something that is more holistic, more radical engagement with the collective demands of the populations in these countries for resource redistribution, corporate responsibility, social justice, and most of all, the right to develop. Third, these legal instruments frame the problem of malgovernance, bad governance, as corruption, and corruption as mere and probably even exclusively a local dysfunction. Thereby, it reproduces stereotypes about conflicts in the global south and the public-private divide, which insulate more often than not international corporate actors from scrutiny and perpetuates impunity. So here are the 3 key points that we should keep in mind. And while supporting these international initiatives and trying to enforce them, we should look at the core or the root cause of the problem and probably rethink the way this legal instrument has been put in place and move beyond the limited scope they have shaped this understanding of this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yunus. That was excellent, also in providing us a huge overview about, again, the complexities, but also that there is hope that actually there are some initiatives that work, but they need to be enforced. You also told us a lot about the different regimes, and I think this is one of the biggest obstacle here, that we have so many different actors involved into this whole field of extractivism, media, non-state actors, corporations, governments, environmental NGOs, local communities. You have heard this. So this will be one very tricky point, how to incorporate and how to involve all those different stakeholders, and well, to create also channels of communication between them and trying to mediate between them. And it's not only on a local ground, it's transnational, as you have mentioned, Yunus. So it is, as we can notice already, it's a highly relevant topic, but it's also a very difficult one to tackle. We do not have so much time left, but I would really like to open the floor now to if there are some pressing questions or general remarks on the presentation so far, something that have been missed, or maybe some other things that could have been added. So we would then hand over the microphones also. We are looking a little bit whether there are questions from the audience who are participating virtually. So anyone who wants to start or wants to make some remarks? Running.
Thank you. Hi, thank you everyone. That was very, very interesting. I mostly wanted to invite Ahmed and Mohammed to say a little bit more. Ahmed, for you, I was really curious if you could say a little bit more about the efforts that you guys did mediating with the oil companies, what their responses were, and what other avenues of pressure you tried to potentially use to get them to be more responsive to the demands of the local community. Because I really liked sort of the methodology that you put forward, but I'm kind of curious what the response was of these major actors and what basically strategies you're using to get them to respond to what you found. And then similarly, we have path one, we have path two. It's an obnoxious question, but I'm kind of curious as to what's already happening that you think is moving us towards path two. Are there local movements that are engaged? Have you seen people engaging in the EU with some of the multinationals? Because it seemed, and maybe this was unfair, that you feel like we're actually really more on path one. So I'm sort of kind of curious if there's any sort of seeds that we can pick up on that would help us think about what would all of us working towards path two look like. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Excellent questions that will keep our panel a little bit busy. Shall we start with you, Ahmed, and then head over to you, Mohammed?
Yeah, thank you, Tobias, for this. Yeah, actually, one activities of the project was to conduct a mediation workshop where those oil company representative and community representative and governmental officials attend in one table. Unfortunately, we were not succeed in this one because we relied on the district director and the governmental officials to communicate with this oil company, but there was no response. Actually, in the first mediation workshop, we were expecting all of them to be in one table, and we did all the arrangements. And when we come to the workshop, we didn't see any one of those oil company representatives. Maybe they didn't get the letter from the governmental offices, I don't know. Maybe because we couldn't find any way to communicate with them. But the officials in the Hadramaut governance, they said, we will send them the invitation to come and join. And at the last minute, they said, well, nobody respond and show up. So we decided to continue in that workshop with the local community representative, with governmental offices, and with our project team to discuss the issue and find ways. So yeah, this is what was the plan, but unfortunately, we couldn't find anyone show up in those 3 mediation workshops, but we did that one, I mean, as a part of the project activities. So probably we are thinking in the future if there is any official way to just go and visit them to their offices and sit together and find appropriate way to have all of them together. Actually, from the interview and focus group discussion, there is some support from the oil companies to some schools and some medical centers, but it is not significant as the community were expecting from the oil companies. But honestly, there was some kind of support, but the community are looking more for job opportunities, to be involved in the oil staff, for example, to discuss with them the case in the court, to discuss with them other issues that are important for the community. I hope this answered the question, Tobias, and the person who asked for that.
Thanks a lot for the question. I'm afraid most of the time it's pass one, but if I state like the example of Tunisia, I feel it's a bit problematic because, okay, we have a still active civil society. There's somehow we're moving a bit away from democracy in Tunisia, unfortunately. But yeah, on one hand, you always hear from government. I mean, when I interviewed some people from the government and so on, they were speaking about that environmental assessment is being done, social impact is being done, and so on. And then when you listen to the civil society, you say you hear different things, that they are not really considering it and so on. There is kind of lack of good communication. Maybe mistrust, maybe from the previous times, from long time. And yeah, I mean, many of the civil society organizations are also EU funded, like, you know, Heinrich Pohl and Rosa Luxemburg and so on. It's a bit, that's why you have a conflict in Tunisia, for example, on this issue, because there is a contradiction. It's not stable. So you cannot, it's either, for example, you rely on the state, but this is not, of course, on the long run stable, or you have more participatory. But if you are in the middle, somehow you got stuck. You have conflict. So that's my perception, at least in the case of Tunisia.
Great, thank you so much. And yeah, maybe also, I mean, adding a little bit, just another thought on this, that, well, we have all those different stakeholders here, and of course, they have different vested interests here, and they have different power relations, and they have also, well, there's a degree of who has more leverage or not. And especially when talking about the private sector or corporations, we are engaging with highly closed regimes here, with many gatekeepers that are not willing in being involved into this kind of mediation process. But still, if with an increase of pressure, be it internationally from initiatives, NGO, media, but also from local communities, that we are actually creating more methods and channels and mechanisms for community participation that will also then increase pressure, can actually be maybe one idea to follow a little bit this kind of second pathway on more accountability and more justice, to not remain in this status quo. And maybe this is already kind of a very important lessons learned here from all the different cases we have heard, that it is clear that there is a nexus between conflict and extractivism, and there are many different actors here, and there are winners and there are losers, and we need to find ways to, well, bring it more in balance again, and not to widen this gap between those who make profits and benefits from this extractivism industries, but also that from the people who are right now very, very vulnerable and suffering from these kinds of industries and these kinds of resource exploitations. And this is not something that will go away with the energy transition, as you have also mentioned. So it's very important to keep an eye on it also in future, that we are making it better than in the past. Yeah, just to add a little bit on this. Are there any further questions? I know that we are already a little bit over time, but I think, I guess, maybe not. Okay.
Thank you very much for a very rich panel that really shows how complex and interconnected the issues are. I had a couple of quick questions. Oh, is that, maybe that's why there was feedback. First was, and I was struck in the Yemen case about, the inability to test something as simple today in the age of artificial intelligence, and you have polluted water and we can't seem to test it. So I'm curious if there are any good examples of regional partnership, getting this water tested, maybe in a university near Yemen, if it's impossible in Yemen, if universities are playing a role, if research institutions in the region are playing a role, or is there still this dependency that we need to ship this water somewhere to the west, to the global north, to get it tested? So that's one question. Are we seeing this example of this? The second one, and again, maybe to Wim, I mean, it's been really striking over the last few years is we're seeing more and more data being generated. These initiatives of using open source satellite imagery, UN reports are full of data and graphs and images of air pollution. And yet, when you turn on, and we've seen independent media start to do these investigations as well. But when it comes to mainstream media, particularly regional mainstream media or national mainstream media, and this is still very much heavy on TV, we rarely see these graphs making it to the nightly news in our countries. And so how can we make sure that these graphs, these images, this pollution of our water, the air that we breathe, become a lot more present in our basically in people's living rooms. And finally, if we have time, just to otherwise I think we'll have other sessions. You know, on the court case in Yemen, so I think I live in France now, and Total is the company that's been profiting from oil in Hadramaut. There's a case that was brought in January by 50 claimants in a French court against Total for pollution of water. And I'd love to, I mean, I don't know if there's any indication from Ahmed and others, how involved is the local community? In the French media, they say there are 50 people from 50 Yemenis brought the complaint. How is that seen? How does that interact with efforts at local mediation? So yeah, just leave it there.
Great, excellent questions. Yeah, so we have again questions on Yemen, but also the data management role of universities. We can also expand this. So if someone else wants to come in, visualization certainly also something you could expand on, Wim, and yeah, again, then also the legislation and the court laws and whether there have been community participation. Shall we start with you, Wim, and then hand over to you, Ahmed?
Yeah, thanks for that really relevant question and timely as well. I think for the data testing, there are now some initiatives and something we will be working on also in Iraq in the next couple of years together with the American University of Sulis to use citizen science as a way to test things. And I already had some great conversations last night with folks from Lebanon who are using citizen science in testing of environmental issues, and this can be expanded as well to conflict areas. So it's a really helpful field where local communities with relatively simple tools can be engaged in testing environmental conditions, be it water pollution, air pollution, soil sampling. It has its challenges as well, which we probably will hear from later in this workshop. But I think it's an interesting pathway forward to get more inclusion of local communities in the research. The downscaling the dependency on sort of Western involvement or sort of expertise, but also and expanding local expertise through also collaboration with universities. So I think that's one pathway forward on that particular part. On mainstreaming media and use of visualization, we do see a lot of visual investigations units being set up by more mainstream media. So of course, the New York Times have been leading on that with their team. The Washington Post have been following, CNN, Al Jazeera are doing that as well. And for example, with Gaza, we also see there's a group of, for example, remote sensing experts who are doing all these damage assessments from Gaza using Sentinel-1 radar imagery because they don't want to depend on the UN, which is often takes some time before they have the data. So they use public imagery, developed a model based on change detection on radar imagery of the damages. And they've been sharing that like on a 2 weekly update with media, and you've seen that reflected in newspapers, online articles, which has been very helpful to showcase how severe the destruction of Gaza is using this public remote sensing data. I have to admit, of course, it's really expertise level assessment, but their aim is to share this data publicly, to make it accessible to journalists. They freely share with journalists, and we can do that with more other areas as well. But of course, I think traditionally, I'm not a journalist, but I can understand newsrooms might be more reluctant because they want to make sure that the data is reliable and who's it coming from, what's the method, where it's based on. So those are usually obstacles that prevent media to exploit the availability of all this public environmental data, and they usually rely on if it's publicized in Nature or others, but usually academics are not very, no offense, but not putting forward really helpful, easy, accessible data products that can be used by media in their own visualizations. So that maybe that's a bridge to gap there. But I think there is a shift now for more access to that. So, but yeah, there's work to be done. And yeah, that's and also looking forward to hear more about the questions about Yemen.
Great, thank you so much. Also, again, for pointing out how important knowledge management is in this regard, the role of knowledge production and the dissemination. And I'm quite happy to hear that there are some things moving on. Well, Ahmed, I hope you're still with us.
Yeah.
And, it would be great to just get an idea about the questions that have been left for you, especially on Yemen, the role of universities. I mean, you're working at one institution, so maybe you can also enrich the discussion and tell us a little bit about the role of academia here and laboratories and the infrastructure in terms of knowledge management and data.
Yeah, thank you, Tobias, and thank you, Nadim, for raising this issue about the soil testing or the sample analysis. Really, we are facing difficulties not only in North or South Yemen, in all of Yemen universities, to have this high technology advances to analyze the samples. I think Dr. Shukri was supposed to be with us from Iraq in this session, and Dr. Shukri himself, they took the children's urine that analyzed in UK to be analyzed because there was no sufficient technology, or maybe they are concerned about the credibility of the analysis in Iraq for this sample. So they took it to UK, they analyzed it there, then they contracted or they communicate with professional staff academia to present the analysis of this samples. I really don't know if there is in Jordan or Lebanon high technology to do the analysis for hydrocarbonic, for the heavy metals to be analyzed. This will be a good evidence to link this with the cancer cases that spread in the oil companies area. Briefly, we don't have this technology in Yemen at all. We communicated with Hadramaut University, Sana'a University, Aden University, but they have a very basic technology to be analyzed. For the second question, yeah, environmental group did file a complaint for the Total Energies for the company. Unfortunately, the media in Yemen didn't cover that very well. And even if they cover it, I mean, as you know, the situation in Yemen is not allowed to file the complaints at international level. So maybe they can complain at Hadramaut level or maybe Aden level. But in the court there in Hadramaut, there are many complaints which ignored by the local community themselves directly to the court. So I think that was a good step from environmental activists and the group, just to let Total Energies there are impact. There are many victims in Hadramaut due to this oil companies. I hope in the future, environmental activists, NGOs, and other people can raise this issue and bring all them together on one table and discuss the step forwards to solve this issue. So thank you, Tobias and Nadim, for raising this issue. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ahmed, so much. And again, repeating the point that we are talking about access and control over resources, but we are also talking about access and control over technology, not only for exploiting those resources, but also for investigating this kind of acts of injustices. And this is also important that we have here more justices when it comes to who has actually knowledge and who is producing this knowledge and where. Let me also add, because you have mentioned it, Ahmed, that unfortunately, as mentioned, Dr. Shukri from Iraq couldn't make it, but he contributed to this BBC television documentary. It's called Under Poisoned Skies, and I'm really inviting everyone to look and watch this BBC documentary, which also gives a very good example and illustration of what is going on in Iraq, especially in southern Iraq, in Basra, and how the extractivism industries here are also contributing to the pollution. If there are no further questions. Yeah.
مرحبا الو مرحبا، شكرا جزيلا. أنا فقط عندي مداخلة في خصوص البي بي سي دوكيومنتري Under Poisoned Sky. أنا كنت يعني أحد أعضاء الفريق في البي بي سي في مدينة البصرة، ويعني أنا قدمت موضوعات الاستخراجات النفطية في جنوب العراق وتحديدا مدينة البصرة وفي منطقة الروميلة. يعني أحد التحديات اللي كنا واجهناها في فيلم الأندر بويز إن ذا سكاي، والطفل أو الشاب علي حسين الذي توفي بعد الانتهاء من الفيلم، كانت تحديات كبيرة جدا. وعملت مع دكتور شكري الحسن. هناك جهود كبيرة يعني تقوم بها وسائل الإعلام المحلية والإقليمية وحتى الدولية، ولكن ماذا بعد؟ من سيحاسب هذه المؤسسات، أو عفوا من سيحاسب هذه الشركات الكبيرة العملاقة التي تعمل داخل العراق؟ يعني فيلم الأندر بويز سكاي، وهناك فيلم آخر أيضا يعني أنتج من قبل البي بي سي، وأنا كنت أيضا أعضاء أحد المشاركين وحصلنا على جائزة في حول هذا الفيلم. ولكن السؤال هنا يعني حتى اليورين سامبل أو العينة اليورين اللي تم أخذها من الأطفال تم إرسالها إلى مختبرات داخل المملكة المتحدة من أجل أن نقول لهذه الشركات هناك عمل كبير وموثوق يجب أن تعتقدوا بأن ما نقوم به هي حقائق تستند إلى حقائق علمية حقيقية. لكن للأسف ليس هناك تعاون من قبل السلطات من أجل يعني محاسبة هذه الشركات. فهل هناك دعوات تقام من قبل المنظمات الدولية وحتى المحامون ضد هذه الشركات حتى الآن؟ يعني نحن نقوم بدورنا كوسائل إعلام أو كصحفيين، لكن ماذا بعد؟ ماذا دور ال NGOs؟ ماذا دور المحامين الدوليين؟ شكرا جزيلا، آسف على الإطالة.
Thank you so much. I think that this might also be a good question for you, Yunus, if you're still with us, and if you feel free to answer or trying to answer this question about the role of the international audience, the United Nations, to lower the pressure or to increase the pressure to those corporations. And if I may, there was also another question in the chat that might also be related to your field. What are certain international mechanisms that can be used for lowering the threat of displacement that also goes along with the extractive industries and more pollution? So just feel free on answer what you would like to answer and where do you see it fits? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for these questions. I mean, I agree with the person that talked about the movie, the documentary movie by the BBC. It is, as I tried to explain, the international legal framework has been trying to address this issue. But let us not forget something that is very important. This is a complex issue that involves government, sometimes weak government versus stronger government, government or states versus very strong international corporations that have, most of the time in the global south have or yield more power, financial power and also legal power than those governments. And third, we are in an era also where the international governance system is being challenged more and more. So to face this situation and try to address it properly, we, as I said in my intervention, we need to rethink the paradigm, and do some sort of paradigm shift in the way we think about these issues, and have a holistic approach and involve as many actors as possible, and trying to create some sort of a win-win situation with the investors in these countries, but also most of all the population in these countries that should not bear the brunt and the negative consequences of this issue. Actually, the international community is realizing more and more that this is something to be addressed properly. There is, as you probably know, on the 24th of September of this year, the Summit of the Future, and among the issues that will be looked at is the legal framework, the international transnational legal framework, the issue of global governance and how to make it more effective, and bring back the role of public sector and the state and the international norms into the way we do business and the way the economic system is working. Regarding the issue of refugees, unfortunately, these are the negative consequences, not only of the extractivism, but many other issues that we see now, especially with the issue of climate change that is mostly, as you know, man-made and is the consequence of a global economic system that has put as a priority profit over people. And then again, if we do not rethink the way we think of development, the way we do development, we'll just keep going towards a dead end that will make things worse, not better for the people. So I think what I call here on all of us is to literally have thinking paradigm shift and see things from different perspective for the good of all human beings in this globe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think that have been great, well, ending words here. And since we are running a little bit longer than initially expected, join me in thanking the panelists here for their inputs and their sharing their knowledge on extractivism industries here. I have learned a lot. I hope that you have too. And well, I think we all aware about the fact that it's a very important topic. We have to continue those discussions, and maybe it will also reflect on the future panels here in this conferences of where you are all invited also to join and be present here to engage with the other very interesting topics. Thank you so much for joining and participating, and thanks to you.
So we have a 15-minute coffee break and we come back.
That's what Nadim said. 15 minutes break and then we continue. Thanks.